The metallic scent of ozone hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid tang of scorched earth. Elliot's boots pounded against the cracked ground as he darted through the ruins of a once thriving alien city. Jagged towers loomed overhead, their glass and metal shells broken by time and war. Behind him, a relentless, inhuman voice echoed through the debris-strewn alleys. "Human, cease your resistance. You cannot escape." Elliot's breath came in ragged gasps, each one a desperate attempt to fuel his aching muscles. The AI hunter, an emotionless, adaptive machine, was closing the gap. It was faster, stronger, and tireless. But Elliot had something it didn't, a mind sharpened by survival and a stubborn refusal to give up. The ruins ahead gave way to a narrow passage, its walls lined with ancient carvings. Elliot slipped into the gap, wincing as the jagged edges of the stones scraped his arms. The AI paused, its sensors scanning the entry, calculating probability of survival. It announced, its voice as cold as the void. Elliot smirked. "Keep calculating, tin can." He sprinted deeper into the passage, his fingers brushing against the carved symbols. He didn't understand their meaning, but he knew the artifact was near. The ruins were its resting place, and if he could reach it before the hunter, humanity's legacy might survive. The passage opened into a vast chamber. At its center stood a pedestal, and atop it rested the artifact, a crystalline orb pulsating with faint blue light. Elliot's heart raced. He'd found it. The sound of metal scraping against stone shattered his moment of triumph. The AI had followed him in. "Objective located. Human termination imminent," it declared, stepping into the chamber with an almost predatory grace. Elliot backed toward the pedestal, his mind racing. He couldn't outfight the machine, but he could outthink it. "Termination, huh?" he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "You should have done your homework on humans." The AI tilted its head, its sensors locking onto him. "We don't die easy." Elliot's hand trembled as he reached for the artifact. The crystalline orb seemed alive, pulsing with a rhythm that resonated deep in his chest. He didn't understand its power, no one did. But the stories passed down through the scattered remnants of humanity spoke of its importance. This was humanity's last chance. The AI hunter advanced, its sleek metal body gleaming under the dim light of the chamber. "Step away from the artifact," it commanded. Elliot ignored the order, his fingers brushing against the orb. A shock of energy surged through him, lighting up his nerves like a wildfire. The orb responded to his touch, its glow intensifying. "Unauthorized interaction detected." "Artifact containment protocol initiated," the AI intoned, raising its weaponized arm. Elliot gritted his teeth, his mind racing for a way out. The orb seemed to hum in response to his desperation, as if it could sense his intent. A memory stirred in the back of his mind, a fragment of a forgotten lesson. The artifact is not a weapon. It's a key. The AI fired, a searing bolt of energy slicing through the air. Elliot ducked, rolling to the side as the blast shattered the pedestal. The orb, however, remained untouched, floating above the rubble as though anchored by some invisible force. Elliot seized his moment. He grabbed the orb, its surface surprisingly warm, and bolted toward a crumbling archway at the far end of the chamber. The AI sensors whirred, recalculating its approach. "Resistance is futile," it declared, firing another volley. The blast struck the walls around Elliot, showering him with shards of stone. He stumbled but kept running, clutching the artifact tightly. The archway led to a winding tunnel, its darkness swallowing him whole. For a moment, the only sounds were his ragged breaths and the distant echoes of the AI's pursuit. The tunnel twisted and turned, and Elliot's legs burned with effort. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. The tunnel opened into another chamber, this one smaller and filled with ancient machinery. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, their meanings lost to time. Elliot set the artifact on a console at the center of the room, his mind racing. "Think, Elliot. Think," he muttered. The console lit up as the artifact connected to it. A holographic display flickered to life, projecting an image of a planet, a blue and green sphere that tugged at Elliot's heart. Earth. Humanity's cradle, a voice echoed in the chamber. It wasn't the AI's cold monotone, but something different. Warm. Familiar. Elliot spun around, searching for the source. The voice seemed to emanate from the artifact itself. You carry the legacy of your species, it continued. The choices you make now will shape the future of the galaxy. Before Elliot could respond, the tunnel behind him exploded in a shower of rock and debris. The AI hunter emerged, its metallic frame scorched but unbroken. Your resistance ends here, it declared, raising its weapon. Elliot stood between the artifact and the machine, his mind racing. He had no weapons, no armor, nothing but his determination. You don't get it, do you? He said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Humanity isn't about strength or technology. It's about spirit. And you can't kill that. The AI hesitated for a fraction of a second, a rare moment of uncertainty. Elliot seized the opportunity, slamming his hand onto the console. The artifact blazed with light, filling the chamber with an overwhelming brilliance. The AI staggered, its systems faltering as the artifact's energy washed over it. Elliot shielded his eyes, the light searing into his vision. When the light faded, the AI was gone. The chamber was silent, save for the hum of the artifact. Elliot fell to his knees, exhaustion finally catching up to him. But he wasn't finished yet. The artifact's voice returned, softer now. The path forward will not be easy, it said. But you have proven that humanity's legacy is worth preserving. Elliot nodded, his resolve hardening. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. Elliot sat slumped against the console, the glow of the artifact illuminating his battered face. His breaths came shallow and uneven, his body aching from the chase and the confrontation. Yet, his mind raced with the weight of what had just happened. The artifact had done something unimaginable, erased a hunter more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. But at what cost? The holographic display shifted, Earth fading into a vast, star-speckled expanse. Other planets appeared, alien landscapes marked with faint indicators. The artifact was mapping something, piecing together fragments of a forgotten past. You hold the last hope of your kind, the voice from the artifact said, its tone steady yet filled with sorrow. Elliot wiped the sweat from his brow. What do you mean? What hope? There's nothing left. The console pulsed, the lights dimming momentarily. Humanity was scattered, but it was not destroyed. Threads remain. Lives endure, the voice explained. The artifact carries the sum of their knowledge, their dreams, their essence. It is a beacon to bring them together. Elliot leaned forward, his hands gripping the edges of the console. If they're out there, then why haven't they come back? Why am I the one running, fighting, hiding? They are hidden, their presence cloaked by necessity. To reveal themselves would bring extinction. The room vibrated as the faint sound of thrusters echoed in the distance. Elliot's heart sank. The AI may have been destroyed, but it wasn't the only threat. He knew better than to think his escape had gone unnoticed. They're coming, he muttered, forcing himself to his feet. The artifact glowed brighter. You must take me to the nexus point. There, the signal can be amplified, and humanity can begin to reunite. Elliot glanced back at the tunnel, the distant hum of approaching ships growing louder. Nexus point? You're going to have to be a little more specific. The holographic map zoomed in on a distant star system, a small, nondescript planet marked with a faint pulse. That's a 6-month journey, even with a decent ship, Elliot said, shaking his head. I've got a rickety cruiser barely held together by duct tape and hope. Your resilience will see you through, the artifact replied. Before Elliot could respond, the chamber shook violently. Dust and debris rained down as a voice boomed from the ruins' intercom system. Human, surrender the artifact. Your resistance is futile. Elliot's stomach churned. It wasn't the AI, it was worse. A contingent of mercenaries, likely hired by those who sought to erase humanity's legacy for good. He grabbed the artifact and sprinted toward the far exit, the weight of the orb surprisingly light in his hands. The ruins shifted and groaned around him, ancient structures barely holding together under the strain of new conflict. As he emerged into the open, the night sky was ablaze with the glow of descending ships. Sleek and deadly, they hovered above the ruins like vultures circling a carcass. Searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the terrain in search of him. Elliot ducked behind a crumbled wall, his heart pounding. So much for slipping out unnoticed. The artifact's voice echoed softly in his mind. Your determination will inspire those who come after you. Do not falter. Easy for you to say, Elliot muttered, peeking over the edge of the wall. A squad of mercenaries disembarked from the closest ship, their weapons drawn. He scanned the area, his gaze settling on a long abandoned transport vehicle half buried in the rubble. If it still worked, it could get him to his cruiser hidden on the outskirts of the ruins. Gathering his courage, Elliot tightened his grip on the artifact and took off, zigzagging through the ruins to avoid the searchlights. The mercenaries shouted, their voices distorted by their helmets. There! He's heading for the transport. Blaster fire erupted, scorching the ground around him. Elliot dove behind the vehicle, his fingers fumbling to access its control panel. The console flickered to life, ancient but functional. Come on, he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. The engine roared to life just as a mercenary rounded the corner. Elliot slammed his foot on the pedal, the vehicle lurching forward and sending the soldier scrambling out of the way. The transport rattled and groaned, its speed barely faster than a brisk jog, but it was enough to outpace the mercenaries on foot. As he careened toward the horizon, the ruins shrinking in his rear view, the artifact pulsed again. You will face greater challenges ahead, it warned. But you are not alone in this fight. Elliot exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on the wheel. I never am. Humanity's always with me. In the distance, the faint silhouette of his cruiser came into view, a glimmer of hope against the oppressive darkness. The transport skidded to a halt near Elliot's battered cruiser, the old ship barely distinguishable from the jagged terrain around it. Its camouflage plating had saved it from detection so far, but Elliot knew the mercenaries wouldn't stay confused for long. He leapt out of the vehicle, artifact clutched tightly in his arms, and sprinted toward the ship's ramp. EVIA system, prep for emergency takeoff, he shouted into his wrist communicator. The cruiser's onboard AI responded with a mechanical chirp. Acknowledged. Systems initializing. Warning, power levels are below optimal thresholds. Noted. Just get it running, Elliot snapped, bounding up the ramp. Behind him, the sky lit up with the mercenaries' searchlights as they closed IN.AS. The ramp sealed shut. The ship's engines sputtered to life, their familiar hum giving him a small sense of relief. Elliot strapped the artifact into a secure cradle, its glow intensifying as the cruiser lifted off the ground. The comm system crackled, and a gruff voice filled the cockpit. Human, you cannot escape. Surrender the artifact, and you might live. Elliot ignored the transmission, his hands flying over the controls as he plotted a course toward open space. The cruiser shuddered as the mercenary ships locked onto him, their weapons firing relentless volleys. Shields at 60%, the AI reported. Hold together, old girl, Elliot muttered, gripping the controls tightly. He maneuvered the ship through the rocky terrain, using the jagged cliffs as cover. A sudden impact rocked the cruiser, alarms blaring as a missile grazed the hull. Sparks flew from the console, and Elliot cursed under his breath. The artifact's voice interrupted his thoughts. You cannot outrun them. Another path must be taken. Suggestions, welcome. Elliot shouted, dodging another blast. The holographic display activated, showing a faint signal nearby a small station orbiting a gas giant just beyond the system's edge. That station houses allies, the artifact explained. They can assist in repairing your ship and safeguarding the mission. Allies? Last I checked, humanity doesn't have any left, Elliot replied bitterly. Not all species seek your destruction. Trust in the remnants of hope. Elliot hesitated. The station wasn't far, but diverting there would mean exposing himself to potential betrayal. Yet, with the cruiser systems failing and the mercenaries closing in, he had no other choice. Fine, he said, altering course. But if they sell me out, this is on you. The station came into view, a sprawling structure that looked half abandoned. Its docking bay lights flickered erratically, as though they hadn't been used in years. Elliot guided the cruiser into the bay, the ship groaning as it settled onto the platform. He kept the engines idling, ready for a quick escape. The docking bay doors closed behind him, and an eerie silence fell. Elliot armed himself with a small blaster and cautiously descended the ramp, the artifact tucked into a reinforced case. The air was thick with tension as he scanned the dimly lit space. Shadows flickered and faint mechanical whirs echoed in the distance. "Who's there?" Elliot called out, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at him. A figure stepped into the light, their silhouette tall and imposing. They were alien, with scaled skin that shimmered faintly under the dim lights. Their eyes, large and golden, fixed on Elliot with curiosity rather than hostility. "You carry the artifact," the alien said, their voice a deep rumble. "And you're not shooting me." "That's a good start," Elliot replied cautiously. The alien inclined their head. "We are not enemies, human. My name is Koresh. I am one of the few who remember what your kind truly stood for." Elliot frowned. "That's not what the rest of the galaxy seems to think." Koresh stepped closer, their gaze falling on the artifact. "The galaxy fears what it does not understand. But some of us know the truth. Humanity's legacy is not one of destruction, but of hope." Elliot lowered his blaster slightly. "You're saying you'll help me?" Koresh nodded. "If the artifact has chosen you, then your mission is vital. We will repair your ship and provide what aid we can. But you must act quickly. The mercenaries will not wait." Elliot hesitated, studying the alien's expression for any hint of deception. But Koresh's eyes held only sincerity. "All right," Elliot said finally. "Let's get to work." As Koresh signaled to unseen allies, the station came alive with activity. Other figures emerged, aliens of various shapes and sizes, each wearing expressions of cautious hope. For the first time in years, Elliot felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost. Maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't as alone as he'd believed. The station's inner sanctum was a maze of dimly lit corridors, a stark contrast to the chaotic world Elliot had left behind moments ago. Koresh and his team moved with purpose, guiding Elliot toward a central chamber where they promised repairs and sanctuary. Yet, every step felt heavy with doubt. The artifact pulsed faintly in its case, casting an ethereal glow that seemed to draw the station's inhabitants like moths to a flame. Dozens of aliens peeked out from shadowed alcoves, their gazes a mix of awe and fear. Koresh stopped at a reinforced door, pressing a hand against a glowing panel. "This is where we can examine the artifact safely," he said, his tone neutral. Elliot hesitated. "And you're sure it'll stay safe in there?" Koresh's golden eyes met his. "I swore to protect humanity's legacy. Betraying you would render that vow meaningless." With a reluctant nod, Elliot followed him inside. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with ancient consoles and monitors displaying static-riddled readouts. A faint hum filled the air, resonating with the artifact's glow as Koresh carefully placed it on a pedestal. "What is this place?" Elliot asked, his eyes scanning the room. "A relic of an older time," Koresh replied. "This station was once part of the Council's archives, a place where knowledge of all species was preserved. When the Council fell, we took what we could and hid here, waiting for the right moment to act." Elliot crossed his arms. "And now that I'm here, what's the plan?" Koresh didn't answer immediately. Instead, he activated a console, and a holographic projection sprang to life. It showed the galaxy, stars twinkling like scattered diamonds, but several regions were marked in ominous red. "This is the current state of the galaxy," Koresh said, pointing to the red zones. "These are territories controlled by the mercenary guilds and their puppet masters. They fear the artifact because it represents something they cannot control: hope. If you activate it, you'll ignite a spark they've spent centuries extinguishing." Elliot frowned. "What do you mean by ignite a spark?" Koresh turned to him, his expression grave. "The artifact doesn't just contain data. It holds the essence of your people, their knowledge, their dreams, their resilience. If deployed correctly, it could inspire rebellion, unite fractured worlds, and rekindle what humanity once stood for." "Sounds great," Elliot said dryly. "But it also makes me an even bigger target." Before Koresh could respond, alarms blared throughout the station. The room shuddered violently, and the hologram flickered. Warning, the station's automated voice announced. Unidentified ships have breached the perimeter. Koresh's jaw tightened. The mercenaries found us faster than I anticipated. Elliot's hand instinctively went to his blaster. Can the station hold them off? Not for long, Koresh admitted. He gestured toward the artifact. We must move it to a secure location. Follow me. They hurried back into the corridors, Koresh leading the way while Elliot kept watch over their rear. The sounds of battle grew louder, punctuated by explosions and the distant screech of alien weapons. As they turned a corner, a sudden burst of light blinded them. A squad of heavily armed mercenaries emerged, their weapons trained on the group. Hand over the artifact, their leader growled, his voice distorted by a menacing helmet. Koresh stepped forward, unarmed but resolute. This station is neutral ground. You have no authority here. The mercenary sneered. Authority doesn't matter. The artifact does. Before Elliot could react, the artifact pulsed with an intense light, its glow flooding the corridor. The mercenaries staggered, disoriented, as the energy washed over them. Move! Koresh shouted, grabbing Elliot by the arm. They sprinted through the chaos, the artifact's glow guiding their path. Behind them, the mercenaries regrouped, their weapons blazing. Elliot ducked behind a pillar, returning fire with his blaster. This is your idea of a safe haven? Koresh's voice was steady despite the chaos. There's a hidden hangar ahead. If we reach it, we can escape. Escape where? They'll just chase us. Not if we use the artifact, Koresh replied cryptically. Elliot gritted his teeth, but followed without argument. The hangar came into view, a cavernous space housing, a sleek, unfamiliar vessel. Koresh hurried to the ship, inputting a series of commands into its control panel. Get aboard, he ordered. Elliot hesitated, glancing back toward the battle raging behind them. The mercenaries were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. The artifact pulsed again, and Elliot felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. Without another word, he climbed aboard the ship, Koresh following close behind. As the engines roared to life, Koresh turned to Elliot. Brace yourself. This is where the real fight begins. With that, the ship launched into the void, the station shrinking behind them as the mercenary ships gave chase. Elliot gripped his seat, the weight of his mission pressing heavier than ever. The ship blasted through the station's atmosphere, the engines thrumming as the vacuum of space swallowed them whole. The stars ahead were cold, distant, but to Elliot they felt closer than ever. Every passing moment, he could feel the pulse of the artifact, its energy flowing through him, beckoning him to unlock its secrets. But with every second that passed, he also felt the tightening grip of his enemies on his tail. Koresh, sitting at the controls, kept his eyes locked on the console. They're already on us. We don't have much time. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, an urgency that couldn't be ignored. Elliot nodded, his eyes flicking to the rear viewport, where the glint of enemy ships grew larger. A trio of mercenary craft were fast on their trail, their engines glowing with dangerous intensity. Their guns could tear through the ship's defenses like paper, and Elliot knew the longer they were in the open, the less chance they had to survive. We need to lose them, Elliot said, gripping the side of the seat. Got any tricks up your sleeve? Koresh's lips curled into a faint smile, but his eyes never left the controls. More than you know. The ship jerked suddenly, and Elliot's stomach lurched as they plunged toward the nearest asteroid field. The mercenaries followed without hesitation, their ships weaving dangerously between the massive rocks. Hold on, Koresh called out as he yanked the controls, sending the ship into a steep dive. The ship rocked violently as it dodged a barrage of plasma fire, the heat from the blasts brushing against the hull. Elliot's hands tightened around the seat as he glanced back, watching the mercenaries move in, their ships as relentless as wolves hunting their prey. He turned back to Koresh, who was working the controls with mechanical precision. What's the plan? Elliot shouted over the noise of the ship. We're going to use the artifact, Koresh replied. We have no other choice. Elliot's heart skipped a beat. Use the artifact? We're being chased by mercenaries. What are you talking about? Koresh didn't answer immediately. Instead, He flipped a switch, and the ship's exterior lights dimmed, cloaking the vessel in darkness. They drifted silently among the asteroids, the only sound the faint hum of the engines. The mercenaries were still close behind, their sensors frantically searching for their target. But the ship, hidden in the shadow of a massive asteroid, was no longer visible. For a moment, it felt like they had escaped, like they had slipped through the cracks of the universe unnoticed. But then, the artifact hummed, a low, resonant sound that vibrated in Elliot's chest. The mercenaries weren't fooled. One of their ships broke off from the pack and began to circle, scanning the area. The others followed suit, fanning out in an attempt to trap them. Koresh cursed under his breath, his eyes flashing with irritation. "They've detected us. Can we fight back?" Elliot asked, glancing at the ship's arsenal. Koresh shook his head. "This ship's equipped for stealth, not combat. Our only option is to make them think we've already gone." Elliot frowned. "How do we do that?" Koresh's fingers flew across the console as he manipulated the ship's systems. "We'll mimic the signature of a nearby ship, an old battlecruiser that was decommissioned. It should confuse their scanners long enough to buy us some time." The ship shuddered again, and the mercenary ships closed in, their weapons primed. Elliot's pulse quickened. He could feel the tension mounting in the air, could practically taste the desperation. They were running out of time, and Koresh's plan had to work, or they would be dead. "Get ready," Koresh said, his voice tense. "I'm going to initiate the decoy." Elliot braced himself as Koresh activated the system. The ship's exterior shifted, emitting a faint distortion that mirrored the energy signature of the battlecruiser. The mercenaries paused, confused for a split second, but the moment didn't last. The lead mercenary ship locked onto the decoy signal and fired, its massive plasma cannon shooting out toward the asteroid field. The blast missed by inches, striking a nearby rock instead, sending a massive chunk of debris hurtling through space. Elliot cursed under his breath. "They're getting more aggressive." "I know," Koresh muttered, his eyes darting between the screens. "We're going to have to risk it." Before Elliot could ask what he meant, the ship jolted forward, rocketing through the asteroid field once more. Koresh's hands danced over the controls, guiding them with incredible precision as they narrowly avoided collisions with massive asteroids. Elliot could feel the pressure mounting. The mercenaries were closing in faster than before. The decoy had worked, but not for long. Koresh was running out of time. ASA. They neared the edge of the asteroid field. Koresh made a sharp turn, cutting across the path of a massive asteroid. The mercenaries followed, their ships barely missing the rock as they continued their pursuit. Elliot glanced at the back viewport once more. One of the ships had locked onto them again. There was no more room to dodge. "We need to make a stand," Elliot said, his voice steady despite the growing panic. "I'll take care of the mercenaries. You focus on getting us out of here." Koresh shot him a sharp look. "Are you out of your mind?" "I'm not asking," Elliot said, already unstrapping himself from the seat. "I'm going." Before Koresh could protest, Elliot grabbed his blaster and dashed toward the rear hatch. The sound of the mercenaries' ships grew louder as they approached, their weapons primed for a final attack. Elliot took a deep breath and threw open the hatch, stepping out onto the cold, exposed surface of the ship. The first wave of fire came from the mercenaries' plasma bolts streaking toward him. He ducked behind the ship's external bulkhead and returned fire with pinpoint accuracy. His heart raced in his chest, but he didn't let fear take over. "Koresh!" Elliot shouted into the comms. "Get us moving!" Now, there was a brief silence before Koresh's voice crackled through. "Hold tight. I'm getting us out of here." Elliot grinned despite the tension. He knew this was his only chance. But the mercenaries were relentless. As the ship began to move, Elliot's heart pounded harder. He would fight until his last breath. For humanity. For the artifact. For their future. Elliot's pulse hammered in his ears as he ducked behind the hull of the ship, the plasma blasts whizzing by him, some striking the ship with searing force. The mercenaries were relentless, pushing their ships closer, desperate to end the chase. He could hear the hum of their engines, feel the heat of their weapons as they lined up for another shot. But he couldn't afford to flinch. His heart raced with the adrenaline, the the stakes never clearer. He was alone on the outer hull, and he had only a moment to make it count. He gripped the blaster tighter and poked his head out, taking a quick shot at the nearest ship. The bolt struck true, causing the enemy craft to swerve violently. But they quickly regained their composure, and Elliot knew they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. "Koresh!" he shouted again, hoping his voice could cut through the chaos. "I need a diversion, now." Koresh's voice crackled through the comms, low and strained. "I'm working on it." "Stay alive, damn it." Elliot bit back a grin, knowing that was all the encouragement he would get from the quiet mercenary captain. The fact that Koresh was still trying to get him out of there was something of a victory in itself. He risked another glance over the edge of the ship. The mercenary ships were closing in. Their weapons glowed, charging up for another blast, and Elliot realized they wouldn't give up. They were close now, too close. He pulled himself together, recalling every trick he knew. There had to be something, anything, that could stop them. The artifact, the key to humanity's survival, was in the ship's hold, but if they were destroyed now, it would be lost forever. He couldn't let that happen. Suddenly, a shift in the air. The ship jerked as Koresh activated something. "Hold tight." Koresh yelled into the comms. A loud, deafening roar filled the air as the ship's cloaking mechanism activated again, but this time, it wasn't just for stealth. A massive electromagnetic pulse shot out, sending shockwaves through the nearby space, disrupting the mercenaries' systems. Their ships faltered, their energy shields flickering as their weapons powered down. It was chaos. Elliot scrambled to his feet, taking the opportunity. With one swift movement, he pulled a grappling line from his belt, firing it toward the nearest mercenary ship. The line shot out, attaching itself to the hull of one of the enemy ships. Without hesitation, Elliot hauled himself up, using the momentum to swing across and latch onto the mercenary vessel's side. The moment he was aboard, Elliot ripped open a panel, bypassing the control systems with a few quick strokes. Sparks flew as he forced the ship's engines into overdrive. The enemy ship's engines roared to life, its speed pushing it out of the formation and into an uncontrolled spin. Elliot grinned. He had just bought himself more time. But the battle wasn't over. The remaining mercenary ships were regaining control, and the EMP pulse wouldn't last forever. He could feel the pressure building once more. He had to keep moving, keep fighting. From his position, Elliot saw the lead mercenary ship, the one commanding the others, turn toward him. It was coming in for the kill, its weapons charging with deadly intensity. He had no choice. He sprinted across the hull of the disabled ship, leaping to the next closest vessel, just as the first shot landed where he had been seconds before. He rolled, narrowly avoiding another blast, then made his way along the outer hull, closing the distance between him and the leader's ship. He had a plan, and this time, he was going to end it. Koresh's voice crackled through the comms again. "Elliot, I'm setting a course for the nearest moon. You have minutes." "Understood," Elliot said, his voice low and determined. He crouched as he neared the edge of the leader's ship, his blaster ready in his hand. The moment it came into range, he fired, hitting one of the ship's engines. It lurched, faltered, but kept going. Elliot fired again, targeting the weak points of its hull, taking out vital systems. Sparks erupted from the ship as its shields flared, but still, the vessel pushed forward. One last shot, Elliot thought. One last shot, and he could make it. He aimed carefully, watching the ship's movements, then pulled the trigger. The shot pierced the shield, the blast hitting the main engine. The enemy ship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, the shockwave pushing Elliot's own ship back slightly as debris scattered in all directions. Elliot stood tall, his chest heaving as he surveyed the destruction. He knew that the rest of the mercenaries were scattered, confused. Their morale was shattered, their leader lost. But he wasn't finished yet. As the smoke cleared, Elliot saw Koresh's ship emerging from the shadows, the distinctive hum of its engines signaling their approach. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, their ships pulling back. But it was too late. The time for retreat had passed. The ship made its final move. Koresh's voice was calm now, but there was a sense of urgency in it. "We need to leave now." They won't be the last ones to come for you, but I'll get us out of here." Elliot nodded, breathing hard. He climbed back into the hatch, where Koresh was already preparing the ship for a jump. The artifact hummed quietly, a reminder of the weight they were carrying. But even as the ship made its jump into the unknown, Elliot knew the journey was far from over. They had bought themselves some time, but the universe was vast, and there were always enemies on the horizon. And now, more than ever, the truth of humanity's legacy hung in the balance. Koresh set the coordinates, and the ship surged forward, breaking through space and time. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled toward an uncertain future. But no matter the odds, Elliot knew one thing: he would not let humanity's story end. Not today. The stars stretched into elongated lines as Koresh's ship powered through the galaxy's depths. Elliot stood near the viewport, watching the streaks of light blur into nothingness. The artifact sat securely in its containment chamber behind him, pulsing softly with a rhythm that felt almost alive. The ship was silent except for the hum of its engines, the calm before the storm. But Elliot could feel it, the weight of what they had just escaped, and the crushing responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. The first real moment of peace in what felt like an eternity, but it was fleeting. The silence was broken by Koresh's voice, rough and raw. "Elliot," he said, his tone serious, "we can't run forever." Elliot turned from the viewport, meeting the mercenary's gaze. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in the heat of battle. Koresh was right. The enemy might have been scattered for now, but they would come again. There would be more mercenaries, more assassins. The artifact was too valuable to let go, too dangerous to allow to fall into the wrong hands. "What are we going to do?" Elliot asked, his voice low. He hadn't spoken the words aloud until now, but they had been building in his mind for days. "They won't stop hunting us, Koresh. They'll come after us wherever we go." Koresh was quiet for a moment. He studied the control panels, his fingers tracing along the navigation console, deep in thought. "We can't hide forever, and we can't fight them all. We'll need allies." Elliot pressed, his frustration building. "The galaxy doesn't care about us, Koresh. We're the last of humanity. We're on our own." "That's not true," Koresh said, his voice firm. "There are others who know the value of what you're carrying, even if they won't admit it. And there are factions who want to keep the artifact safe from the galactic powers that would use it for their own purposes." Elliot clenched his fists. "But can we trust them?" Koresh looked at him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. "It's not about trust. It's about survival." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Elliot knew Koresh was right. They didn't have the luxury of being choosy. If they were going to survive, they would need to make difficult decisions. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The quiet was broken once again, this time by a warning beep from the ship's console. Elliot's heart leaped in his chest as a holographic display of the star system they were entering flashed before him. There was a ship, a massive warship, slowly coming into view on the horizon. "That's not good," Koresh muttered, his hands moving quickly over the controls. "They're already here. And they're not alone." Elliot's pulse quickened. It was a huge vessel, easily the size of 3 cruisers combined. He could see smaller ships flitting around it, like a swarm of bees circling a hive. The signal they had picked up was unmistakable. They were being tracked. "They've got us," Elliot said, a cold edge in his voice. Koresh didn't waste time. "Get to the back hatch. I'll hold them off." "No," Elliot said, his voice firm. "We need to fight, not run. We're not losing the artifact." Koresh turned sharply, eyes wide with disbelief. "You don't know what you're saying, Elliot. This isn't about pride. It's about survival. You can't take on that many ships." "I'm not going to take them on alone," Elliot said. He reached for the control panel and initiated a command. The ship lurched forward, accelerating at an insane rate. Koresh cursed under his breath, but Elliot didn't look back. They were moving fast, too fast for the enemy ships to follow. But as Elliot prepared to execute the next phase of his plan, the odds were stacked against them, and if they didn't find a way to strike first, they would be overrun. Koresh was already moving toward the back hatch. He'd make his escape, sure enough, but Elliot wasn't going to leave the ship behind without giving everything he had. As the warship drew closer, Elliot could see a dozen smaller fighter ships launching from its belly. The enemies were coming. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't a battle he had chosen, it had been forced on him. "I'm not running," Elliot said aloud, his voice steady. He glanced back at Koresh, who was already standing by the hatch, his eyes cold. "You're on your own with this, but you've got more courage than most." "I'm not alone," Elliot said with a half smile. "Not anymore." He turned back to the control console, setting the ship on a course directly toward the warship. The engines roared to life as he pushed them to the limit, the ship accelerating as it plunged toward the massive vessel in front of them. The distance between them closed. Elliot's mind raced. This was it, the final choice. The moment when everything would be decided. The artifact's true power was still a mystery, but Elliot knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. He would take the risk, even if it meant his end. The warship loomed ever closer. His ship was a speck compared to the monstrous vessel, but Elliot didn't hesitate. He activated the ship's cloaking device, disappearing from the radar just as the enemy ships fired their first shots. The weapons passed harmlessly through the space he had been moments before, and with a burst of speed, Elliot cut through the enemy formation. The chase had begun. But now, Elliot wasn't running. He was hunting. Elliot's breath was heavy as his hands gripped the control panel. The cloaking device kept them hidden for now, but it was only a matter of time before the enemy ships locked onto their position. He glanced at the artifact, still glowing faintly in the chamber behind him. It had been humanity's last hope, and now it would either be the key to their survival or the reason for their extinction. His pulse quickened as the tension mounted. The warship was right ahead, its towering form looming like a shadow in the distance. There were dozens of smaller ships darting in and out of formation, patrolling the area. They couldn't stay hidden for long. Elliot had to make a move, and fast. "Koresh, get ready," Elliot called over his shoulder. The mercenary had been silent since he'd left the cockpit, likely preparing for what was coming. Koresh's voice crackled over the comms. "I'm ready. Just don't get us killed before I can do my part." Elliot didn't answer. He focused entirely on the task ahead. He had one shot at this. They couldn't afford a mistake. With a deep breath, Elliot disengaged the cloaking device, the ship becoming visible to the enemy. It was a calculated risk. He was hoping to draw their fire, to get their ships clustered together so they could be destroyed in one fell swoop. But the enemy wasn't so easily fooled. Almost immediately, they began to respond. The smaller ships closed in, their weapons charging, ready to tear through the hull. "Koresh, now!" Elliot shouted. The mercenary acted instantly. A burst of fire erupted from their ship's turret, a blast of energy aimed directly at one of the smaller ships. The shot was precise, calculated, and it hit its target. The rest of the enemy ships reacted quickly, but it was too late. Elliot had already pulled them into the heart of the chaos, and now the warship's sensors were locked onto them. They were too close to the massive vessel to escape without a fight. "Hold on!" Elliot yelled as he pulled the ship into a tight roll, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma fire. The ship shook under the impact, and Elliot gritted his teeth, pushing the engines to the limit. The artifact hummed ominously, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. "Now's our chance," Koresh muttered. "Get us to their weak spot." Elliot knew exactly what Koresh was talking about. The warship's central core, the heart of its defenses, was vulnerable. If they could strike there, they could disable the ship long enough to escape. But getting close enough to strike meant taking unimaginable risks. "Elliot, look out!" Koresh shouted as a massive energy blast slammed into the side of the ship, sending it veering off course. Elliot fought to regain control, the ship bucking and shaking violently as sparks flew from the console. "Damn it!" Elliot cursed. He wasn't sure how much more the ship could take. The enemy fighters were closing in again, but the warship's guns were trained on them now. The battle was reaching its climax. "I can't hold them off much longer." Koresh's voice was tense. "Get us in position now!" Elliot's mind raced. He had one shot at this. The warship's guns were firing in rapid succession, but their aim was just a fraction off. He needed to get closer. He slammed the ship's controls forward, diving into the heart of the enemy formation. The ship groaned in protest as Elliot guided them toward the core. It felt like an eternity, the world outside becoming a blur of fire and destruction. But at last, they were there. The core was exposed, a bright red beacon amidst the chaos. Elliot took a deep breath and initiated the final sequence. "Koresh, get ready for the blast," Elliot warned. He locked in the targeting system just as the warship fired another round of devastating energy blasts at them. He had no time to hesitate. With a single press of a button, the ship's full arsenal of weapons erupted in a brilliant burst of firepower. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave rattled their ship, but Elliot didn't flinch. They had hit the core. The warship's shields flickered, then collapsed entirely, and the entire vessel began to destabilize, its power core reacting violently to the damage. "We've done it," Elliot breathed, but his relief was short-lived. The ship trembled beneath them, and the lights flickered as the enemy fighters continued their assault. The warship was falling apart, but they weren't out of danger yet. "Elliot," Koresh warned, "the core's gonna blow. We need to get out of here now." Elliot didn't argue. He yanked the control yoke back, sending the ship veering sharply away from the collapsing warship. But the damage was already done. The shockwave from the explosion sent them spiraling out of control. The ship twisted, and Elliot's vision blurred. For a moment, it felt like everything was collapsing around him. The ship broke through the atmosphere of a nearby planet, hurtling toward its surface. "Brace for impact," Koresh shouted, his voice strained. Everything went black. Elliot's eyes fluttered open to the sound of alarms and the soft hum of machinery. The wreckage of their ship was scattered across the planet's surface. They had crashed, but they were alive barely. Koresh was the first to stir, groaning as he pulled himself from the wreckage. His eyes locked onto Elliot, and for a moment there was silence between them. "Guess we're not dead after all," Koresh muttered, rubbing his head. Elliot took a deep breath, pushing himself to his feet. The world around them was strange, alien, desolate, but alive. He turned to the artifact, still intact, still glowing faintly in its containment chamber. They had made it. But the war was far from over. There were more enemies, more challenges ahead. The artifact's power had been unleashed, but so had humanity's legacy. It would take all of them, all their courage and ingenuity, to fight for the future. And for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt a spark of hope. The story wasn't over yet. The last of humanity was still standing, and they weren't going down without a fight.